Cowboy only wanted a place to sleep, but 3 Apache widows wanted a husband instead. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The wind came down from the ridge like a living thing, pushing sand and dust through the empty valley. By the time Caleb Vance spotted the half-collapsed barn, the sun was gone and the sky had turned the color of lead. His horse limped with every step, breath steaming in the cold air, hooves dragging through the dry creek bed that cut the land in two. He had been riding for 3 days with nothing but jerky and bad coffee left in his saddlebag. Looking for shelter before the night frost set in, he reined up near the doorway, the wood groaning under the weight of years. The place looked abandoned. One side caved in, the roof slanting low, a faint wisp of smoke curling from inside. Caleb swung down, boots crunching over frozen mud. He lifted the latch slow, letting the door creak open. Inside, a weak fire glowed near the center, surrounded by 3 figures sitting close together. For a second, he thought they were ghosts. Then one turned, a woman with dark skin, eyes steady and sharp. She didn't flinch, just move her hand toward a stick lying near the fire. The other 2 stayed still, watching him the way animals do when they aren't sure whether to run or fight. "I just need a place to wait out the storm," Caleb said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "A corn'll do." The woman didn't answer. The fire popped, sending sparks up the broken rafters. He could see them better now. 3 Apache women, all worn thin from cold and hunger. The eldest, maybe late 20s, sat upright, her back straight even though she was shaking. The second woman's hair was braided tight against her shoulders. She had a limp. The way she shifted her leg told him it never healed right. The youngest looked barely grown, her hands wrapped around a tin cup she must have heated on the fire. The eldest finally spoke. "You soldier." "Not anymore," Caleb said, pulling off his gloves. "Scout once. Now, just a man looking for sleep." The answer seemed to settle something, though not much. She nodded once, slow, and turned her gaze back to the fire. Caleb crossed the floorboards and sat near the far wall, setting his rifle beside him where they could see it. He didn't reach for the fire, didn't ask for food. The air between them was thick, the kind that comes when fear and need share the same space. After a while, one of the women, the youngest, rose and brought over a strip of dried meat. She didn't speak, just set it near him and stepped back. He nodded once. "Thank you." She looked at him for half a breath, then went back to the others. Outside, the wind grew louder, beating against the barn walls. The horse snorted, uneasy, but Caleb stayed where he was. The warmth of the fire spread slow, pushing the cold out of his bones. He noticed how the eldest woman kept glancing toward the door, her hand never far from the stick. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was watching for them. Protecting. "You got names?" he asked after a long silence. The eldest looked up. "Asha," she said. Then she nodded toward the others. "Tala. Nomi." He gave a slow nod. "Caleb." Asha studied him for a moment, then said simply, "You stay until storm pass. Then go." "Fair enough," he replied. He didn't argue. He didn't plan to stay longer than the weather would allow anyway. The night deepened, wind slipping through the cracks like a whistle. The fire burned low, and one by one, they drifted to rest. Caleb stayed awake, leaning against the wall, eyes half closed but ears sharp. It wasn't fear that kept him up. It was the sound of breathing that wasn't his own, the reminder that he wasn't alone for the first time in months. Wide dawn. Frost lined the window gaps, and the air was white with mist. When Asha stirred, she found him already outside, hauling fallen wood from behind the barn, stacking it near the fire pit. He didn't ask for permission. Inside, Tala watched him through the crack in the wall. Her eyes narrowed at first, then softened slightly. The man worked quiet, no waste, no swagger, just movement and breath. When he came back in, she asked the first question since he'd arrived. "Why help?" Caleb shrugged. "Cold's coming worse. Firewood won't cut itself." For the first time, Asha's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. The kind that says maybe, just maybe, the danger has passed. The day passed slow, filled with the sounds of wood cracking, cloth being mended, the faint hum of Nomi's voice while she stirred beans in a dented pot. Caleb said little, But every gesture built a kind of peace no one dared name. Night came again, and the fire glowed against the old boards. He felt the strangeness of comfort, the smallest thread pulling him towards something he hadn't expected, belonging, and outside. The wind moved across the barren land, carrying no sound but the creak of the door that no longer felt like it needed to stay closed. Morning came gray and sharp, the kind of cold that made the ground brittle and the air feel hollow. Caleb woke to the sound of someone moving near the fire. He reached for his rifle out of habit, then stopped when he saw it was Asha stirring the ashes with a stick. She didn't look at him, just added more wood and blew on the coals until the flame rose again. Her hands were red from the chill, and her dress hung off one shoulder where the seam had split. He pushed himself up, bones stiff from the floor, and went outside. The sky was wash pale, clouds sliding low over the ridges. His horse stood tied near the broken fence, still favoring its front leg. Caleb crouched, ran his hand down the animal's side, and saw the swelling hadn't gone down. It meant he wasn't going anywhere soon, storm or not. When he came back inside, the women were sitting close together, speaking in their own tongue, low and quick. They stopped when he entered. Nomi's eyes darted to him, uncertain, but Tala's stare didn't waver. Asha didn't flinch either. She looked at him like a woman weighing the measure of a man's intentions. "You stay more days," she said finally. "Horse not walk." He nodded. "Looks that way." "You work, you eat," Tala said sharply, her English broken but her tone steady. Caleb almost smiled. "Fair trade." He took his coat and stepped out again without another word. The barn's roof sagged worse on the east side. The corner posts rotted from years of rain and sun. He found a rusted hammer among the scraps and started mending what he could. The sound of wood striking would echoed across the valley, mixing with the wind. Inside, Nomi watched him through the doorway. "He fix?" she asked softly. Asha nodded. "He fix." Her voice carried something unspoken, a kind of cautious respect. To be why midday, the wind had eased and the sun broke through. Caleb leaned against the post, catching his breath. He hadn't meant to stay this long, but something in the quiet rhythm of the place began to slow him down. The way Asha moved with purpose, the way Tala limped but never stopped working, the way Nomi laughed once when the fire smoke stung her eyes. It was the first laughter he'd heard in weeks. At dusk, Asha brought him a tin plate of beans and a small piece of bread. "You eat," she said, setting it beside him. He looked up. "You don't trust me yet, do you?" Her gaze met his without hesitation. "Trust is for fools," she said simply. "But you work. You do not take. That is enough." He took the food. Fair answer. The evening stretched quiet. The horse shifted outside, the fire crackled, and for a moment it almost felt like a home. Then Caleb remembered something that hadn't been asked yet. Who they were running from, and why 3 Apache widows were hiding in a broken barn miles from any settlement. He waited until the silence grew softer before he spoke. "You got someone coming for you." Asha's hands stilled over the pot. Tala's eyes flicked toward the door. Nomi lowered her head. For a long time, none of them answered. Finally, Asha said, "Men come from Fort last moon. Took others. Said we belong to them now. We run." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Soldiers?" She nodded. "Blue coats. They say we need protection. But they want wives. Not ours to give." That explained the fear in their eyes, the way they watched the horizon more than they watched him. He'd seen it before, soldiers playing law where no law lived. He'd left that life behind for a reason. "I won't tell anyone you're here," he said. Asha didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The words hung in the air, simple and binding. That night, when the cold deepened again, he saw Nomi shiver beneath a threadbare blanket. Without thinking, he took his own coat and placed it over her. She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "You sleep cold," she said. "I've been colder," he replied. Later, as he sat near the fire, Tala spoke softly from across the room. "You have wife." He hesitated. "Once. She died. Long time ago," he said, voice low. He didn't say how, and they didn't ask. But the question settled something between them. Now they all knew the shape of loss in the room. Before sleep came, Asha said one more thing. You stay until horse walk. Then you choose. He didn't answer. The fire flickered across her face, showing the weariness in her eyes, the strength that kept her upright anyway. Outside, coyotes called in the distance, and the wind carried the faint smell of snow. Caleb sat there, staring into the flames, realizing that for the first time in years, he wasn't just passing through. He was staying, even if he didn't know why yet. Snow fell that night, thin at first, then heavy enough to cover the creek and roof in a white hush that silenced the valley. By dawn, the barn was sealed in frost, the air inside sharp enough to sting lungs. Caleb woke to the faint sound of movement, soft steps, cloth brushing wood, the muted clink of a pot. Asha was already awake, wrapping strips of cloth around her arms before stepping outside, but he followed her out, breath fogging in the air. She was breaking ice in a half-frozen bucket to draw water. Her fingers were raw, red against the metal handle. Without a word, he took the bucket from her and finished the job. She let him. That simple act told him more than words could. Permission, trust, something beginning to shift. Inside, Tala and Nomi had started sorting through what little they owned. Caleb noticed it all now. 3 blankets between them, 1 dented pan, a few scraps of cornmeal, dried beans, and nothing else. He realized they had been surviving on almost nothing long before he came. He reached for his saddlebag and set 2 tins of coffee and a small bag of jerky on the table. Asha's eyes flicked up. Yours, she said. Ours now? He replied. Tala studied him carefully. You share. Why? He kept his eyes on the fire. Because I got hands that still work and no one else to use them for. It wasn't a speech, but it was more than he usually said, and it made Nomi smile, a quick, shy curve that disappeared as soon as it appeared. That day, they worked together. Caleb patched the gaps in the barn walls, while Asha and Tala spread out old cloth to dry what little cornmeal they had salvaged. Nomi collected snow in a bucket and set it by the fire to melt. The rhythm of labor filled the space where suspicion had been. Later, when the light dimmed, Asha approached him. You fix roof good. You build strong. He nodded, wiping his hands on his coat. Didn't think I'd be hammering for anyone again. You fix things, she said softly, but you still broken. Her English wasn't perfect, but the meaning struck clear. He looked at her, unsure how to answer. She didn't press, just turned back to the fire, leaving her words to hang between them. That night, listeners might have wondered, did Caleb truly understand who these women were beyond their silence? So far, he knew only that they had fled soldiers. Now, as the snow piled against the barn, those unanswered questions began to unravel themselves. While Tala was outside feeding his horse, Caleb sat near Asha. The men who came for you, he said. You knew them before? Her jaw tightened. They came from San Verde Fort. Same men who kill my husband. After, they say I belong to them. Say Apache woman cannot live alone. We run. They chase. Many die. Her voice broke only once. We hide here. Thought no one find. He nodded slowly, understanding the depth of her fear. It wasn't just soldiers. It was the world itself that refused to let them exist on their own terms. After a long silence, he said, You won't have to run again. Not while I'm here. Asha turned, eyes glinting in the low firelight. You promise. I don't make promises I can't keep, he said. But I mean it. It was the closest thing to a vow either of them had spoken in years. When Tala came back inside, snow dusting her braid, she saw them sitting closer than before and paused, not with anger, but quiet understanding. She glanced toward Nomi, who was half asleep by the fire, then gave a faint nod. For the first time, it felt like they were not just 4 lost souls sharing space. There was something like a family taking shape. As the hours dragged into night, the wind outside turned fierce. The roof groaned, snow sliding down in sheets. Caleb checked the posts again, hammer in hand. Asha climbed the ladder behind him, holding the lantern. Her hair brushed his shoulder as she steadied the light. When he shifted to reach a cracked beam, she caught his arm, not out of fear but instinct. Her fingers lingered, the warmth of her skin against his cold sleeve. He didn't move. Neither did she. The sound of wind filled the silence between them, and when he finally looked down, She didn't look away. Something passed there, an understanding deeper than any language either of them spoke. When they climbed down, their hands brushed again. This time, neither pulled back. The next morning, the barn was half buried in snow, but inside it felt almost warm. Nomi hummed softly while she cooked. Tala sat sharpening a knife near the doorway, and Asha mended Caleb's torn sleeve. The motion was simple, practical, but her hand lingered at the end, smoothing the fabric against his arm. "You stay long," she said quietly. "Seems that way," he replied. "You think about leaving?" He looked toward the door. The wind howled, the world outside a white blur. "Not today," he said. Her eyes softened. "Maybe not tomorrow, too." That was the moment the story truly turned, when staying began to mean more than shelter. When the man who had wandered for years found a reason not to outside. The wind pushed against the walls, but the fire inside held steady, and for the first time since he'd found the place, Caleb didn't hear the storm at all. Only the faint rhythm of 3 women breathing beside him and the sound of his own heart keeping time with theirs. The storm broke 2 days later. The snow turned to slush that bled down the hillsides, leaving the world gray and wet. The creek gurgled again beneath its crust of ice, and the wind carried the smell of thawing earth. Caleb stepped outside at first light, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. The air was quiet, too quiet that he checked the horizon the way soldiers used to, scanning for movement. The valley was still, but tracks cut across the ridge above the creek, fresh, deep, not animal. Someone had passed through after the storm. He crouched, touched the print. Horses, 2, maybe 3, headed west. He followed them with his eyes until they disappeared behind the ridge. Whoever they weren't settlers. The prints were wide, military-grade shoes, not the kind used by ranch hands. Inside, Asha noticed his silence. "What you see?" He brushed snow from his coat. "Riders. Couple of them. Maybe scouts." Her face tightened. "Blue coats." He nodded. "Could be." The tension in the barn thickened. Tala reached for the knife she kept hidden beneath a plank, her hand steady despite the tremor in her jaw. Nomi stopped stirring the pot, her eyes flicking between them. Caleb saw the fear they didn't speak, not just of being found, but of being taken again. He looked at Asha. "You trust me to handle it?" She held his gaze, searching for something in him. Tell them we hear." He shook his head. "I told you. I don't sell people out." She studied him for a long moment, then gave a single nod. That small act of trust bound them tighter than any words. Through the day, he kept watch. He fixed the fences, chopped wood, and made it look like routine, but his eyes were always on the ridge. He'd spent years tracking men. He knew how they moved, how they watched from a distance before deciding whether to ride closer. By dusk, the sky turned red and low, the kind of light that made the land look ready for fire. Inside, the women worked quietly. Asha sewed new patches into their clothes. Tala polished the knife with a strip of leather. Nomi hummed a tune from her childhood, a soft, wordless melody that made the air feel alive again. It was the first peace since morning. When night came, Caleb sat near the door with his rifle across his knees. He hadn't needed to hold one in months, but it still fit his hands like it always had. He remembered the way command voices barked, the smell of powder and blood. He hated that part of himself, but tonight it was all that could keep him safe. Later, when everyone else had drifted off, Asha came to him. Her hair was loose, falling across her shoulders, her face lit by the weak glow of the fire. "You think they come back?" she asked. "Hard to say," he said. "But I've seen men who don't give up easy." She sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter. "You fight before. Too much. You tired of fight?" He gave a small nod. "But I'll do it again if it keeps you safe." Her hand brushed his sleeve, a quiet thank you without words. For a long time, they sat together, listening to the wind push against the walls. When she finally leaned her head on his shoulder, he didn't move. It wasn't a bold gesture, just quiet acceptance. One wounded soul finding rest against another. By morning, the prints on the ridge had vanished, covered by thaw and mud, but Caleb's unease didn't. He decided to move their supplies inside the barn loft, out of sight. Tala and Asha helped, And while they worked, Nomi found an old tin mirror in the rubble. She laughed at her reflection, then turned it toward Asha and said, "We alive." It made Asha smile, the first real one Caleb had seen from her. Later, they ate together, the four of them sitting close to the fire. The food was simple, beans and bread again, but shared laughter gave it weight. Caleb realized something had changed, not just trust, but belonging. He wasn't a guest anymore. He was part of the rhythm of their days. Still, he knew the peace wouldn't last. Listeners would wonder how men from San Verde Fort could have lost 3 women and stopped looking. The truth was, they hadn't stopped. He'd heard it once while passing through the settlement near the fort. A bounty posted for 3 Apache widows escaped from military custody. Return alive, the notice said. Now those same men might be closing in. That night, when Asha sat by the fire brushing her hair, he finally told her. "There's word out," he said quietly. "They're looking for 3 women. Sound a lot like you." She froze. "How much they pay?" "Enough to bring men this way." She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "You tell them nothing." "I told you already," he said. "I don't trade people for coin." She looked up at him, her voice steady. "Then you stay. You stay, and we not run again." He didn't know why he said yes, but he did. "I stay." The firelight flickered against her skin, tracing the lines of her collarbone where her dress had frayed. She didn't cover it. Instead, she looked straight at him and said, "Then we family now." The words hit harder than any promise. For a man who'd spent years without a home, it felt like something sacred. He reached out, brushed her cheek with his fingers, rough against soft skin. She didn't pull away. For a heartbeat, everything stilled, the wind, the fire, the world outside that would never understand them. Then she leaned forward, her breath warm against his. Their lips met, hesitant, searching but sure. It wasn't the desperate kiss of loneliness. It was the quiet sealing of a choice neither could undo. When they parted, her forehead rested against his. "Now you cannot leave," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Didn't plan to." Outside, the snow melted into slow streams running toward the valley, washing away tracks and scent alike. For now, they were safe, not because the world had grown kinder, but because they had decided to face it together. The thaw brought more than water. By the 3rd morning after the kiss, Caleb knew trouble was close. The air felt different, the kind of quiet that pressed against the skin before danger arrived. He had spent enough years on the frontier to know the land could speak if a man listened hard enough. He was checking the traps along the creek when he saw it. A torn scrap of blue cloth snagged on a sage bush. He crouched and picked it up, the coarse weave and color unmistakable. Cavalry issue. He turned it in his hand, felt the old weight of memory settle like a stone in his gut. When he got back to the barn, Asha was kneeling near the fire, braiding Nomi's hair. Tala sat sharpening the blade again, always ready. They looked up when he entered, their eyes reading his face before he spoke. "They're close," he said. "How close?" Asha asked. "Half a day, maybe less." Saw cloth from a coat on the ridge. The room fell silent. The only sound was the pop of firewood. Nomi's hand froze midair. "They find us again?" she whispered. "Not yet," Caleb said. "But they will if we don't plan." Tala stood. "We run." Asha shook her head. "Run where?" "Snow still deep. Horse still weak. They catch us." Caleb looked from one to the other. "She's right. If you run, they'll track you easy. You've been leaving prints every time you fetch water." Asha frowned. "Then what we do?" He didn't answer right away. He was thinking the way soldiers thought, terrain, cover, timing. The barn sat in a low hollow with only 2 exits, the front door and a side gap through the stable wall. If they rode from the ridge, they'd come down from the west. That meant one chance: hide, not flee. "We stay quiet, hide everything that shows you've been here," he said finally. "If they come, I'll talk." Asha's face hardened. "You talk, they kill you." "Maybe, but they'll listen to a white man before they shoot." She rose, standing inches from him. "You owe us this." He met her eyes. "Maybe I do. Maybe I'm just tired of seeing the same damn thing happen over and over." The line hit her deeper than he expected. Her gaze softened, the tension between them shifting from fear to something else, the shared exhaustion of people who'd seen too much. The next hours passed in a blur of motion. They buried the fire under wet ash, moved supplies into the loft, and covered the windows with old feed sacks. Caleb cleaned his rifle, checked his knife, and looped his horse's reins near the door. When everything was done, the barn looked abandoned again. By noon, the sound came, distant hooves echoing off the ridges. Asha grabbed Nomi's hand and pulled her behind the stacked hay bales, Tala crouching beside them. Caleb stood alone near the door, every muscle tight, but his face calm. The riders appeared first as shapes through the glare, then as men, 3 of them, wearing long coats, rifles slung. The lead one had a red scarf and a sharp posture of command. When they stopped, their horses snorted clouds into the cold air. Caleb stepped out, hand resting lightly on his gun, but not drawing it. The lead soldier narrowed his eyes. "You there? You seen any natives come through this valley?" Caleb shook his head. "Ain't seen much of anyone. Snow's kept most folks away." The man dismounted, boots crunching. "You live out here alone?" "For now." "Name?" "Caleb Vance." The soldier studied him. "Vance, you were a scout, weren't you?" "Heard that name back at San Verde." Caleb's stomach tightened. "Used to be." "Then you know what kind of people we're looking for," the man said. 3 squaws. Escaped government protection. Dangerous. You'd be doing the territory a favor if you told us where they're hiding. Caleb's jaw flexed. "Ain't seen them." The soldier smiled thinly. "You sure? You know what they're worth?" $100 a head. Caleb didn't blink. "I said I ain't seen them." The man studied him for a long moment, then spat into the dirt. "If you do, Vance, you'd better tell us. You hide them, and you'll hang beside them." He turned back to his horse, but something in Caleb's eyes must have given him pause. He looked back once more. "Careful who you stand for. Ain't much left of men who pick the wrong side." Caleb didn't move until they were gone, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. When he finally stepped back inside, the air felt heavy. The women hadn't moved yet. Asha came out first, her face unreadable. "You tell them nothing," she said quietly. He nodded. "They'll come back." "Then we ready," Tala said, her tone sharp. Caleb exhaled. "We'll build a trench near the barn wall. If they ride in, you go through it to the creek bed and run east. You understand?" Asha looked at him, her voice low but steady. "And you?" "I stay. Someone's got to buy you time." She stepped forward, grabbed his hand, and pressed it to her chest over her heartbeat. "No, you stay with us." For a moment, the air froze between them. Her hand was warm, her pulse strong. He felt it like a drum inside him, something that reminded him what it meant to belong. Finally, he said, "Then we fight together." That night, they didn't sleep. They worked by lantern light, digging, stacking, preparing. Tala laid out stones for cover, her limp slowing her but not stopping her. Nomi carried water, eyes wide but brave. Asha stayed beside Caleb, quiet but unwavering. When it finally stopped to rest, dawn was only hours away. She sat next to him near the fire, her hand finding his again. "You could run," she whispered. "I've done enough running," he said. Her eyes searched his face. "Why you care so much?" He thought about it for a long time before answering. "Because the world's taken enough from good people." Someone stood up and said no more. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a breath. "Then you ours now." He didn't speak, just nodded once slow. In that silence, a decision was made that none of them would take back. Come morning, they'd face whatever rode down that valley. Not as fugitives, not as strangers, but as one family bound by choice. The wind outside picked up again, carrying the faint cry of coyotes. Caleb glanced at the sky, red streaks rising in the east. He knew what that color meant. Trouble was coming with the dawn. The morning broke with a pale red light spreading across the valley. Frost hung low over the creek, thin as breath. Caleb had been awake all night, sitting by the barn door with his rifle laid across his knees. The others slept in shifts. Asha last, curled near the fire with her shawl pulled high. When she woke, the first thing she did was look for him. When she saw he hadn't moved, she brought him coffee in a tin cup. "You know sleep," she said quietly. He shook his head. "Didn't want to." "Afraid?" she asked. He gave a tired half smile. "Used to be. Not anymore." She studied him, the way his jaw set when he said that, and something in her chest softened. In the stillness between them, it became clear the man who had walked into their lives a stranger was no longer one. Tala and Nomi joined them soon after. They spoke little, each aware of what the day might bring. The trench behind the barn was finished, narrow but deep enough to hide them if it came to it. They had packed what little food they had into a sack. Caleb checked the rifle again, then the revolver tucked at his belt. When the sound came, it wasn't distant this time. Hooves. Many. The earth trembled faintly underfoot. Asha went rigid. Nomi's eyes filled with fear, but she stayed quiet. Tala gripped her knife, knuckles white. Caleb stood, calm and deliberate. Looking through the gap in the boards, .6 riders came down the ridge, sunlight glinting off their rifles. The same men as before, but more with them. They moved with purpose now. No scouting, no searching. They knew. Someone from town must have told them there was smoke after the storm. Caleb turned. You go through the trench. Stay low. Don't come out till I call. Asha shook her head immediately. No, we stay. You know, fight alone. Tala, Caleb said, his tone sharp. Get them out of sight. But Tala stepped forward beside Asha. You help us. We help you. He saw it in their faces. They wouldn't leave him, not after all that had passed. He exhaled through his nose, the faintest nod of surrender. All right then. Stay behind cover. Only shoot if you have to. They took their positions. Caleb moved to the doorway, steady and silent. He waited until the riders came close enough for their words to carry. Vance, the man with the red scarf, called out. We know you're in there. Step out. Caleb stepped into the open, hands visible but not empty. The rifle rested in the crook of his arm. Morning, he said evenly. Cut the talk, the man barked. You lied. We tracked smoke, prints, cooking. We know you're harboring them. I told you, this place has been empty for months. The man smirked. You think I'm blind? We found a woman's scarf half a mile back. He held it up, fluttering like a taunt. Asha's, Caleb realized, the one she used to tie her hair. The soldiers dismounted, spreading out in a loose half circle. Caleb's pulse slowed. His fingers found the rifle's trigger guard but didn't pull. He counted their steps, their spacing, the way one lingered near the barn door. He knew their rhythm, knew how men like this moved before they decided to shoot. Last chance, the leader said. Step aside and you walk away. We only want the women. Caleb's voice dropped low, steady. You'll have to ride through me first. The man laughed. You die for them. Caleb didn't blink. Already have once. Just didn't finish the job. The soldier's smile faded. Your choice, scout. The world went still, a silence so sharp it felt carved from glass. Then the first shot cracked the air. Caleb fired back before the echo faded, the recoil kicking against his shoulder. One man dropped near the fence. Another shouted, diving for cover. The air filled with gunfire and the sharp smell of powder. Inside, Nomi clutched her ears. Asha pulled her close, then crawled toward the wall where Tala crouched, returning fire through a split in the boards. Caleb moved fast, reloading, firing again, ducking behind a post as bullets splintered wood around him. Stay low, he yelled. Asha crawled to his side, eyes fierce, not afraid. She handed him another cartridge belt from the table. More. You shouldn't be here. She met his gaze. You know, send us away. He couldn't argue. She was right. They were all in it now. The fight lasted minutes that felt like hours. When the last shot faded, 2 of the soldiers lay still in the dirt, the rest retreating up the ridge. Caleb stayed crouched until the echo was gone. His breathing was ragged, his arms trembling from the tension. Then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. Gone, Tala said, voice hoarse. Caleb nodded. For now. Asha touched his shoulder. You hurt. He looked down, a graze along his arm, blood streaking through torn fabric. Just a scratch. She tore a strip from her dress and wrapped it around his arm. You fight like Storm, she said softly. He gave a tired smile. And you 3 didn't run. That's something. We stay, she said, tightening the knot. You stay. We same now. Her words were quiet, but in them lay a truth the story had been building toward since the first night he found them. They were no longer bound by fear or survival. They had chosen each other. When the fire burned again that evening, the barn smelled of gunpowder and smoke. Nomi sang softly while cleaning the floor. Tala sat sharpening her knife once more, and Asha rested beside Caleb as he leaned against the wall. Her head found his shoulder without hesitation. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, covering the ground where the battle had been. It erased the prints, the blood, the bodies, leaving only the sound of the wind moving through the valley, quiet and steady, like the breath of a world still turning. Caleb looked at the fire and said, half to himself, they'll send more. Asha lifted her head. Then we ready again. He nodded, knowing she meant it. Yeah, he said softly. We'll be ready. But deep down, he also knew this fight had changed everything. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were defending a home. The storm of gunfire had left behind a silence heavier than any wind. By morning, the snow had buried the traces of blood, leaving the valley clean again, but nothing about the people inside that barn was untouched. The fire burned low, its light flickering across faces drawn from exhaustion. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat by the door, his rifle within reach, watching the snow fall through the crack where the bullet had split the plank. Asha moved quietly near the fire, boiling water in the tin pot, her movements slow but deliberate. Every now and then, her eyes drifted toward him, checking the wound on his arm, checking that he was still breathing. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Tala and Nomi were cleaning the last of the dirt from the floor, their rhythm slow and steady. The barn smelled of wood smoke and wet earth, of a place that had survived another night. When Asha came to him, she carried a strip of cloth damp with hot water. You let me change bandage, she said. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. She knelt beside him, peeling away the blood-soaked fabric. Her fingers brushed his skin, rough but careful. Not deep, she murmured. You lucky. He watched her, not just her hands but her calm. After everything, she wasn't trembling. She'd seen death too often to waste time fearing it. You did good, he said quietly. All of you. She glanced up. We do what we must. You could have run. She shook her head. Running never saved us. Staying did. Her words hit something deep in him. He thought of the years he'd spent drifting from place to place, never staying long enough to build anything, never trusting anyone enough to stand still. He realized now that what he'd been running from wasn't danger. It was belonging. When she finished tying the fresh cloth, she sat beside him. You killed before, she said softly. He nodded. Too many times. You hate it. Every damn one, he said. But I'd do it again if it keeps you safe. Asha didn't answer. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the quiet between them saying what neither could. Outside, the wind began to pick up, rattling the door on its hinges. Caleb stood, checking the latch. Won't hold much longer, he muttered. We need to start fixing this place proper. He went out into the cold with Tala to cut new boards from the broken sidewall. The air was sharp, the snow blinding white under the mid-morning sun. For a while, they worked in silence, the sound of the axe echoing across the valley. Then Tala spoke, her English halting but clear. You stay now. Yes. He paused mid-swing. If you'll have me. She gave a small nod. Asha want you stay. She think you bring peace. He raised an eyebrow. Peace. She smiled faintly. You fight like man who tired of fight. That made him laugh, a dry sound that startled even him. Guess she's right. By the time they returned, Asha and Nomi had gathered food from the creekside traps. 2 rabbits. Enough to last a few days. The sight of Asha skinning one by the fire, sleeves rolled up, eyes focused, hair falling loose, made something tighten in Caleb's chest. He hadn't realized how much he'd come to rely on that sight. Her steady hands, her quiet presence that filled the empty spaces inside him. That night, they ate together in silence. But it was a different silence now. Not fear, not caution. Just the sound of breathing, fire, and life continuing. Afterward, when the others slept, Caleb stepped outside. The sky had cleared, full of stars. The world looked new, as if the fight had scrubbed away the past. He stood there a long time, his breath turning to mist, until he heard soft steps behind him. Asha, you should rest, he said without turning. So should you. she answered, coming to stand beside him. He looked at her, the starlight glinting on her hair.
This story is produced by Wild West Love Story YouTube channel. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.
You think they'll come back? Maybe, she said. But now we not hide. Now we ready. He nodded. I'll build a lookout on the ridge tomorrow. You'll be able to see anyone coming before they're close. She smiled faintly. You talk like this land yours. He turned toward her. Ours, Asha, if you want it that way. Her eyes held his for a long time, and then she reached for his hand. Then we make a home. It was the first time she'd said that word, home. Not shelter, not hiding, but something chosen. She stepped closer, the air between them thin and cold. You're not alone now, she whispered. He touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the faint scar near her jaw. Neither are you. She leaned in, slow, unhurried, until her lips met his again, warmer, certain this time. There was no hesitation, no fear. Just two people who had lost everything finding something solid in each other. When they parted, she smiled, small but real. You stay, Caleb. You stay and live. He nodded. I'll stay. They stood there together under the stars, the snow glowing faintly around them, the barn behind them whole again in its own way. Inside, the others slept, safe, fed, alive. For the first time since he could remember, Caleb felt peace not as an idea, but as a thing he could touch. The kind that came from earning it, not being spared from it. Spring came slow to the valley, creeping down from the mountains in patches of green. The snow receded to the ridges, the air softened, and the ground, once hard as stone, turned damp and alive again. For the first time in months, the creek ran clear instead of muddy, the sound of it steady and calm. The barn no longer smelled of smoke and blood. It smelled of earth, leather, and life being rebuilt piece by piece. Caleb worked from dawn to dusk, rebuilding what the winter and the fight had torn apart. He raised new posts from cut pine, replaced the door, built a small corral for the horse, and cleared a space where a garden might grow. The rhythm of labor steadied him. Every swing of the hammer another breath toward peace. Inside, Asha, Tala, and Nomi turned the barn into something that no longer looked like a hiding place. Asha patched blankets into curtains. Tala made shelves from scrap wood. Nomi filled the cracks in the walls with clay and straw. Slowly, the place began to look lived in, not as a refuge, but as a home. Each evening, when the sun dipped low, they would sit outside together. Asha would mend clothes while Caleb sharpened tools. Tala would hum low songs in her language, and Nomi, always restless, would feed bits of bread to the horse. There was laughter sometimes, quiet and small, but real. It had been weeks since the gunfight, and no riders had come back. Still, Caleb kept his rifle within reach. The habit was hard to break, and he knew Asha understood. She never told him to put it away. She simply made sure that when he came inside at night, there was food and a place beside the fire waiting for him. Listeners might have wondered by now, what bound these people together beyond survival? Why did a man who once lived by the gun now spend his days digging in the dirt? And why did three widowed women choose to trust him? The answer was simple. They had all lost everything once, and this fragile piece, was what they built from the ashes of what was gone point one afternoon. While Caleb was repairing the roof, Asha came out carrying a small bowl of beans and cornbread. She looked up at him and said, "You work too much." He grinned down at her. "Roof doesn't fix itself." She shook her head. "You fix everything but you." He laughed, low and genuine. "Maybe I don't need fixing anymore." Asha watched him for a long moment, her expression softening. "Then maybe you stay because you want, not because you must." He looked down at her, at the curve of her shoulders, the strength in her stance, the way sunlight caught her eyes. "That's exactly why I stay," he said quietly. That evening, while Tala and Nomi prepared supper, Caleb took Asha down by the creek. The air smelled of wet grass and pine, the water reflecting the fading light. They walked in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't heavy anymore. "You miss your old life?" Asha asked suddenly. Caleb thought about it. "No," he said after a pause. "There wasn't much worth missing. Just noise and orders and graves. And now," he looked out at the horizon, where the land stretched wide and quiet. Now I've got reason to build instead of bury. Asha smiled faintly. You talk like old man. He chuckled. Probably feel like one too. When they reached the bend in the creek, he stopped. There's something I need to ask, he said, turning to her. You ever think of leaving? Finding your people again? Her gaze dropped to the water. My people gone. Tribes scattered after soldiers came. Tala, Nomi, they all I have. She looked back at him. And now you. He nodded slowly, her words sinking deep. Then I guess we're all each other's people now. They stood there a moment longer before Asha reached for his hand. You build house one day? Maybe, he said. Right here. Big enough for all of us. She smiled. Then I help. It was a promise, quiet and firm. When they walked back to the barn, dusk had settled over the valley. The air was cool, and the first stars blinked to life overhead. Tala was humming again, and Nomi had fallen asleep beside the fire with the horse's blanket over her shoulders. Caleb sat beside Asha, their hands brushing, neither pulling away. The light from the fire flickered across her face, across the scar on his cheek, across the quiet that had replaced their fear. I never thought peace would look like this, he said softly. Asha tilted her head. You think peace is no sound? He smiled. No, I think it's this work, fire you. She leaned closer until their foreheads touched. Then you found it. The rest of the night passed without a word. The fire burned low, the horse shifted in its stall, and the world outside turned still again. Caleb didn't dream that night. He didn't need to. He'd already found the thing he'd been chasing all those years. Not glory, not redemption, just the quiet certainty of belonging. By the time dawn came, the valley was wrapped in gold. The roof no longer leaked. The barn stood whole. And for the first time, there was smoke rising not from survival, but from the making of a home. By early summer, the valley had changed. What had once been a place of hiding had turned into something that breathed. Fences mended, fields planted, smoke curling from the chimney each morning. The barn, once broken and cold, now stood firm under a patched tin roof. Its walls were lined with tools, blankets, and shelves of small things they had built or traded for. Jars, a mirror, an old Bible Asha found buried in a trunk and kept for its blank pages, which Nomi used to draw small pictures of birds and flowers. Caleb woke each morning to the sound of the creek and the soft stir of life around him. Asha rose before the sun to tend the fire. Tala checked the snares, and Nomi sang while grinding corn. It was no longer about survival. It was living, slow, deliberate, shared. The scars of the winter fight were still there, bullet marks in the wood, a faint discoloration in the earth outside where blood had frozen and melted away, but they had stopped being reminders of danger. They were proof that this place was earned. Listeners who had followed from the start might have wondered how a drifter and 3 widows could truly build a life in a land that never stopped taking. The answer came with the first harvest. The small garden Asha planted behind the barn sprouted corn, beans, and squash. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Caleb built a new cabin beside it. One room, rough but solid. When the last plank was set, he carved something above the door. For lines crossing in the shape of the Apache wind sign, symbol of protection that he didn't tell the women he'd done it. Asha saw it first and traced her fingers across the carving, eyes soft. You learn our ways, she said quietly. I learn what keeps us safe, he replied. That night, when the fire burned low, Tala asked something no one had said out loud before. What we call this place? Caleb looked up from the cup in his hands. You mean the land? Yes, she said. Every home has name. He thought about a moment. Creekbend, he said, where the water turns. Asha smiled. Good name. Water never stop. Always move, always stay. The next day, Caleb rode into the nearest settlement for supplies. It was his first trip back to town since the fight. He kept his head down, hat low, rifle strapped across his back. The storekeeper looked him over, but said nothing. Outside, he overheard 2 men talking near the hitching post. Those soldiers never came back, one said. Heard their captain got recalled east. Fort's empty now. Caleb said nothing, but a quiet relief settled in his chest. Whatever ghosts had hunted them were gone. When he returned that evening, he found Nomi and Tala laughing by the creek, washing clothes. Asha stood nearby, watching the sky, the light of sunset across her face. She turned when she heard his horse. "You come back," she said. "Always do," he answered, smiling. That night, they ate fresh bread for the first time. The smell filled the barn, warm and sweet. Asha had baked it in the small clay oven Caleb built for her. She tore a piece and placed it in his hand. "Now you part of us," she said. "We share bread. That means family." He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, at the way her eyes caught the firelight, and nodded. The moment was quiet, but it held everything the story had been leading toward. No vows, no ceremony, just the understanding that he wasn't leaving again. Later, as the others slept, Asha stepped outside and found him sitting on the steps. The moon was high, the valley silver and still. She sat beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. "You build fence, fix house, make garden," she said softly. "What you build next?" He looked toward the cabin. "A cradle, maybe," he said, voice low. She turned her head, eyes searching his. "You think I can have child again?" "I think you can have whatever this land gives you," he said. "And if it's a child, then that's just more life to keep warm." She was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Then we see." The quiet stretched between them, the sound of frogs in the creek, the whisper of wind through the grass. She leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly under his chin. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, the motion natural now, unthinking. When dawn came, they were still there, the first light touching the hills, the air cool and clean. He looked at her, asleep against him, and realized the man who once came here only to find a roof now had everything he never thought he deserved. A home, a family, a future by midsummer. The cabin stood finished, smoke curling from its chimney. Asha, Tala, and Nomi moved their things inside, the space filled with laughter and the smell of bread. Caleb carved 4 marks into the wooden mantle, one for each of them. Above it, he hung the bone necklace Asha had once carried but never worn. She had given it to him that morning, saying, "Old life gone, new one begin." When evening fell, they all stood outside together, the man who'd stopped running and the women who had stopped hiding. The barn glowed golden behind them, the creek shining in the last light. The wind moved softly through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Caleb took Asha's hand, Tala's and Nomi's standing close behind. No words were spoken. There didn't need to be any. Everything they had fought for, lost for, stayed for, it was all there in that single, still moment. The camera of the story would pull back there, showing the rebuilt barn, the small cabin, the smoke rising steady into the sky, a picture of peace carved out of a land that gave none easily. And for once, nothing waited beyond the horizon. No threat, no question, no uncertainty. Just the sound of the creek, the warmth of the fire, and the simple truth that they had made it. They were home.